Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be focusing on the target. I can describe how the author's use of figurative language, such as simile and metaphor, impacts the reader. Earth is a blue marble in a universe that is black as ink. So, figurative language is language that's used in an unexpected way to create a special effect or feeling. So, when an author is writing, they might use figurative language to really help us imagine something. So, for example, a simile is a comparison of two things using like or as. Javier is strong as an ox. A metaphor is a comparison of two things by saying one thing is another. The car was a baking oven in the hot sun. Is it really an oven? No. But when we think about ovens, we know that they're really hot and that you can cook things in them. So they're saying that this car feels like it is really hot enough to cook bread in there. Then we have personification, which gives human qualities or characteristics to an animal or object. Our little boat skipped over the waves. Do boats really skip? No, but we know that that means that it's moving really quickly and maybe it's sort of moving in sort of a hopping motion almost. And then a hyperbole is an exaggeration, usually used for dramatic effect or to make people laugh. I have a million things to do today. Your list might really only have 10 things on it, but it feels like a million. So, what I'd like you to do is you're going to open your My Book to page 102, and we're going to keep reading from there. I woke feeling as if I hadn't slept at all. Heart thrumming like a symphony, I sprang off the bunk, eager to get the journal back to Kate and talk to her. But it wasn't until lunch that I had a chance. At breakfast, I was serving, and Kate's chaperone, Miss Simpkins, was at the table the whole time. And then she whisked Kate out before I could even hand her the journal. Then there was the clearing up and preparing for lunch. Around midday, we were passing over the Hawaiis, and the captain slowed down and took us lower so the passengers could get a good look. On other trips, we sometimes made stops, but this was a direct passage, so everyone had to content themselves with peering down at the lush foliage and hear the shriek of macaws and spider monkeys and toucans and cockatoos. The heady scent of the island's flowers reached us even at 100 feet. We were close enough so people on the ground waved and cheered, and bathers on the beach shielded their eyes with tanned hands to look up at the great ship as it painted its massive shadow over the sand and water. We were cruising over the outer islands when the captain entered the lounge, grinning. Ladies and gentlemen, point of interest. Off the starboard side, we're passing Mount Maturus, and if I'm not mistaken, she's about to erupt. Nearly everyone put down their forks and knives and rushed to the windows. In the distance was the island with its volcano, a great heap of stone looking more like the devil's anvil than anything. Despite the green hue of its lush vegetation, great puffs of gray smoke were billowing up from its jaws and getting darker by the second. "Thar she blows!" shouted Baz. Black bits of rock came shooting out from the cone, and the sound hit us a second later. A deep, thunderous vibration that passed through the entire ship and rattled the windows. We were upwind of it, or we would have been soon choking on the ash and smoke that was venting high into the sky. Soon the volcano was spitting out orange and red sparks. Then a glutinous tongue of black and orange lava oozed over the crater's rim and started a leisurely slide down the slope, incinerating everything in its path. Good thing this was an uninhabited island. Amazing, isn't it? I glanced over and Kate was beside me. She was looking out the window, but I knew she wasn't talking about the volcano. There was no sign of Miss Simpkins, and there was no one else around us. Everyone was watching the eruption, talking and pointing excitedly and snapping pictures. Incredible, I said and faltered, uncertain what to say next. I took the journal from my inside breast pocket and passed it to her. Thank you. You don't believe it, she said coldly. I'm not saying that. It's just, I'm not altogether certain your grandpa really knew what he was seeing. So, what I'd like you to do on these two pages, on page 101 and 102 and 103, I'd like you to go back and really look for figurative language. So, look to see, where does the author use imagery? Where are they trying to paint a picture for us with their words? Where do they use metaphors and similes to describe Mount Maturus? So as you're going through, you're going to underline parts that show evidence of figurative language with how the author is describing the volcano. How can you say that? He spent days watching them and taking down notes like a scientist. He couldn't have made all these things up. Let's try that again. How can you say that? He spent days watching them and taking down notes like a scientist. He couldn't have made up all these things, not in such detail. It did seem an awful lot to imagine. Even if he was delirious, I remembered his drawings. A weak, shaking hand couldn't have spun those lines. He always saw them from a distance, I pointed out. True, but think what he saw, the feeding, the birthing. Those pictures toward the end. I had traversed the skies over Atlanticus and Pacificus and never seen such creatures. How to tell her that her grandpa had been ill and his fevered brain had projected these things on thin air for his failing eyes to see? I thought of all her camera equipment, her bottles of chemicals, and could not find it in my heart to speak the plain truth. You think like the others, she said, and there was a new hardness in her voice. I think your grandfather was unwell and saw things. Maybe, I added. All the friendly light in her eyes had frosted away, and it made me feel sick. No, he saw them. He'd been watching them for days. She clenched the journal in both hands, knuckles white. He was sick by then, I suppose, but maybe he didn't mean us to think those last drawings were real. He was just imagining. Your grandpa's not the first to see such things. They're called sky kelpies. You see them from time to time. Reflections on the water, mostly. All sorts of weird atmospheric things. Airshipmen used to report them all the time. It's like how sailors used to think that there were mermaids. They were just porpoises and narwhals and such. I could see that she didn't much like this much. I was insulting her. But what else could I say? I was just telling her the facts. Maybe you should talk to the captain about it, I suggested. I'm sure he'd talk with you, miss. Captain Walken surely must have read the journal last year when we took the gondola aboard. I wondered that he'd never spoken of the strange things it contained, but of course he wouldn't have. He would never have divulged the contents of another captain's log to any but the relevant officers and authorities. I don't need to talk to the captain about it. I expect I'd get much the same as what I've just heard from you. It's not that I haven't looked, I blurted out as she turned to leave. I've looked for all sorts of things, you can take my word on it. Every flicker in the sky. I shook my head. I've never seen anything, but I'd love to. What your grandpa described is amazing. It sent shivers across my belly and then up into my armpits. Me too, she said, nodding with a frown. That tingly feeling. I get it every time I read it, and I've read it 100 times now. All the passengers in the lounge, including Miss Simpkins, luckily, were still crowded around the windows, riveted by the eruption. The volcano was putting on quite a show. Half the island was aflame now, lava crackling and steaming as it poured into the water. Have you shown the journal to anyone else? I asked her. Your parents, surely. I saw her nostrils narrow as she sucked in an angry breath. They're embarrassed by the whole business. Mother always thought he was odd. The traveling, the balloons, just silly. They always thought he was a bit of a nutter. Hallucinations, that's what they'd say. Let's just forget the whole thing. That's why I had to send the letter to the Zoological Society myself. I blinked. I couldn't let my parents stop this from getting out to the world. This is a major discovery, a new animal. I wrote them a letter describing more or less what my grandfather saw and asked them if they'd care to see a facsimile of his journal. Did they reply? Oh, yes. From her handbag, she produced a letter. It was a folded square, the creases so worn that you could tell that she'd folded and unfolded it many times. I could imagine her face when she read it, getting mad all over again. It wasn't a long letter, and I read it quickly. Dear Miss DeVries, thank you for your letter. We appreciate your taking the time to tell us about your grandfather's observations on his balloon voyage, namely the sighting of some kind of winged mammal. We feel strongly that should such a creature exist, it would surely have been sighted and documented long ago. Every year there are hundreds of unsubstantiated sightings of monstrous creatures in land, air, and sea, and we feel it is our duty as men of science to gently remind you that your grandfather was not trained, and his state of health he may have suffered additional deficiencies of observation. Additional deficiencies of observation, Kate scoffed, reading over my shoulder. They meant he was seeing things. The rest of the letter was usual. Yours sincerely, and thank you for your interest in the Zoological Society, etc., etc. It was signed Sir Hugh Snuffler. I saw him in my mind's eye, short and balding, with a big, loud voice. As if they'd explored every inch of the planet, as if anyone has. And what about you? Kate fairly shouted. What about me? You've flown for years, yes? Well, 3. And how much of the actual sky have you traversed? Not much when you put it that way. Exactly. Ships have their routes and, as you say, deviate from them only when necessary. That must leave millions and millions of miles of unexplored sky and sea. I imagine you're right, I said, nodding. And how long have airships really been flying? 50 years or so now? Hardly any time at all, in other words. So, how can we possibly know they don't exist? Especially out here over the Pacificus, I said, surprising myself. The skyways and sea lanes are much less well traveled compared to the Atlanticus. Exactly, she said, beaming. Do your parents know you wrote to the Zoological Society? Heavens, no! They would have locked me in my room without pen or paper. They would have been mortified. Telling someone outside the family? Spreading his mad rantings? Question is this all imagination or real? The coordinates he wrote down for the island, do we pass over them? I'd have to check, but I think not. You will check, though? Yes, I said. And if we don't pass over, will you tell me when will be nearest the spot? I'll do that. Will you really? She seemed amazed. Yes. So I want you to think, what are we learning about our two characters of Matt and Kate in this section? Grandpa thought they were migrating, and this is the same time of year. We could see them. I thought of her fancy camera. And what if you get a picture? What'll you do with it? I'll send it directly to Sir Hugh Snuffly Nose at the Zoological Society. That'll set him straight. I laughed. I'm sure it will, miss. I wish you wouldn't call me miss. What should I call you? Kate, of course. If I started calling you Kate now, when it's just the two of us, I might slip up in public, and that'd be seen as impertinent. Silly rules. People like you invented them, not me. Good point, she said appreciatively, a thoughtful crease in her brow. Really good point. Here's what I'll do, I said. When I get off duty, I'll check the charts and find out when we'll be closest. Thank you. I just hope it's during daylight. I hope you see them, I said. I really do.